21 Grams is back, and welcome to the third iteration of our show. And in this iteration, we are offering a one-on-one interview with indie artists, and we're going to examine three very specific aspects of the creative soul. The cerebral, which will be all about the chess moves and deep thoughts that go into the aspects of the work and creating the work. The emotional, which will be all about the investment the artist has made in the work and creating it. And the practical, which will all be about the application of common practices, tropes, and ideas. In this episode, we step out of the world and into the Cassidyverse with our friend Adam Gaffen as we talk about his science fiction and LGBTQ collection. That being said, I'm your host, Joe Compton, and let's get deep into it. Here now is a new episode of 21 Grams. Yes, hello everybody. Welcome to the show. It's awesome to see you all, and hello Anita. And welcome Adam. It's so awesome to have you.
Hey, I'm thrilled to be here, and on the return of this show.
Yeah, it's awesome. I'm glad to get this opportunity. I think this is the first time you and I have gone one-on-one, so this is going to be fun.
I think so.
I love it. Just give it. I mean, I kind of introduced yourself a little bit, but I wanted to kind of start because you have a unique way of explaining how this all came about. You are really a muse for your character, and so kind of explain to people what that means and what that's about.
So I write the Cassidy Chronicles, and so I've said this a bunch of times. We might be the authors, we might be the ones putting the words on the screen and putting them down on the paper, but it's our characters' lives that we're writing about. So Kendra, who has turned into the main character in this universe, she tells me stories, and sometimes, frequently they're about her, but not always. And so I write them down, and 8 books so far and counting. Another one underway.
Awesome. That's good to hear. I like that idea. We'll talk about that a little bit later. When did Kendra first come to you? Was it something that you kind of were you looking for an angle to do a science fiction kind of thing, or was it just that she spoke to you and you had to listen?
So it's a little bit interesting because I started everything with, the first book in the Cassidy Chronicles universe is the Cassidy Chronicles. Mm-hmm. And I started out with what ended up being the first chapter. It's about a page long, and it's a wedding. And I had that entire scene in my head. I wrote it down, and then I had to figure out what was going on. But at that point, I was the writer trying to discover the story. And I think it wasn't until I got the first 2 novellas out and then stopped writing for 7 years. It wasn't until I came back to it that I was no longer looking for the story, but I was writing down the story as it was being told to me. Mm-hmm. So in that time, I went from, I got to find something, I got to search for something, I got to get something, and thumbs up to Vanessa. So I went from the traditional writer looking for story to where I am now, which is, I'm just, I'm conveying the story that the muse is telling me. And in this case, the muse is generally Kendra. But since then, I've brought her, she's really come to life. The second book in the universe, which is the first book in the Artemis War series, The Road to the Stars, didn't work the way I was writing it. That was my last attempt really at writing something and not just kind of channeling it. It wasn't working until Kendra said, look, this happened in my world, drop it in, you need to tell it from that perspective. And then it worked. So after that, I kind of said, okay, sure.
I'm curious, in knowing these characters well now on this journey, you've written several books with several different characters in this universe. Is there a comfort level, or are you aiming? Is there a comfort level where you're aiming now at situations? You're looking for situations to write about, or can they still surprise you at this point?
Oh, they still surprise me. Oh, yeah. They very definitely still surprise me. So, give you two examples. So, Ghosts of Tantor, which is the start of the new series, I had introduced a rogue planet in deep space. And the reason I introduced a rogue planet in deep space is because I was trying for a take on the pressures of exploration kind of novel. Because it's 4,000 people in a tin can 1,400 light years away from home.
Yeah.
And there are going to be there are rough edges because not everybody gets along with each other. So I dropped in this rogue planet to ratchet up some tension. And it turned out that was actually it took this whole story in an entirely different direction than I was expecting. So there's that. And then in Into the Black, the very first story, which was actually the last one written for the book, at the end of it, all of a sudden, somewhere down the road, I have to write another novel to tell the story of what happened after that story.
Yeah.
Because, it ends with Minerva saying, well, it looks like we got another mission.
Yeah.
And yes, they do. I'll get to it.
Are you comfortable just staying in this space, or do you feel like there's going to be a certain endpoint that you're wanting to eject yourself from and kind of move forward with something different?
So one of the reasons I love writing in science fiction is because it can incorporate any genre. You've read most of Into the Black.
Yeah.
So now that is science fiction. It is all set in the Cassidyverse. But in that, you have a time travel story to start things off. And then you have a teenage romantic comedy. You have a new adult coming of age thriller. You have a political thriller with a piece of the action. You have a story which is kind of philosophical with a dream made flesh. As Diana is contemplating, all of the changes that are going to be happening. You have a story about adapting this Terran Federation to the needs of a completely alien race in when cats fly. So that's looking at some of the issues that would kind of get glossed over. Murder on the Missouri is a straight up noir detective story. The last story in the book is a retelling of the Medusa myth. So I can write and write and write, and it's such a large universe with so many different characters that it can go on forever. I have actually another story in my back pocket. It's currently out on. It was submitted for an anthology, so I can't do anything with it until I hear back. But it's set a couple thousand years into the future, but in the same universe. So, as long as there are stories in this universe to tell, I'm going to keep telling them. Mm-hmm. But I can tell any kind of story. I mean,
yeah. Have you thought about challenging yourself in that regard? Is that something that you've contemplated before? Has there been a moment when you've contemplated, or you're pretty comfortable where you are right now?
Well, I'm currently writing. One of the reasons that the Cassidy books have kind of slowed down a little bit in the second half of the year is because I'm actually writing another series of novels under a pseudonym, and it's a fantasy romance.
Oh, cool.
So it's a totally different genre. Mm-hmm. I mean, absolutely not science fiction. It's set 1,000 years ago. And I'm having a lot of fun with it. And it's doing nicely. So, am I stepping out of comfort zone? Yes, I'm just doing it under a different name because, I do the Cassidy Chronicles. Now the Cassidy Chronicles are going to have a whole bunch of different books. I mean, you look at it already.
Yeah.
When I'm sitting there talking to somebody and they say, "What book should I start with?" I'm like, well, it depends on what you like in your science fiction. If you like an action adventure, bang, 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 fast moving story, start with the Cassidy Chronicles because that just flies. But if space opera is more your thing, like Star Wars or Dune, the big picture, then start with The Road to the Stars because that's the Artemis War series. Mm-hmm. If Star Trek is more your jam, let's follow a single ship and what they discover, then The Ghosts of Tantor. And if you really don't know, all right, Into the Black. Try a little bit of everything.
I really appreciate that about that book. The other thing I really enjoy that I discovered in reading your book, and I'm going to get into the Cassidy Chronicles as well, but is the level of the layering of humor involved in it too? Is that very important to you? Do you feel like there's got to be some levity in, because some of these situations are really harrowing, and so science fiction has that kind of undertone to it a little bit. Good science fiction will have a little bit of levity to it.
Well, life does.
Yeah.
You look around and people will get into all sorts of miserable situations all the time. And how often do you hear, now is not the right time to crack a joke?
Right.
Heinlein, back in Stranger in a Strange Land, had an excellent point, which is the reason humans laugh is because life hurts.
Yeah.
And you have to laugh. You have to laugh at, some miserable things. Think of all the jokes which are, pratfalls and, the pie to the face. Right. These are not funny things, but we laugh at them. Mm-hmm. So there's there is humor everywhere, and it's a coping mechanism. And the more stressful the situation, the more those coping mechanisms are going to come out. So that's why in these books, at the end of the piece of the action, Kendra just finished beating the pulp out of somebody, and Cass says, "Is that blood?" And Kendra says, "Oh, yeah, but it's not mine."
Yeah. There's a great moment and between her and Marie that is one of my favorite moments in Into the Black when she cracks a joke and Kendra goes, "That wasn't really the right time to crack a joke, but damn if that wasn't funny."
Mm-hmm.
That cracked me up.
Yeah, and that and that's Kendra is she's 21, 22 at the time.
Uh-huh.
So she's just being exposed to kind of the darker side of life.
Yeah.
So,
and finding that she's really good at it too.
Yeah, and being surprised at surprised about that part of herself.
There's something about the characters that you write about too. There's this kind of underlying confidence, even though they go through trials and tribulations and they have moments of doubt and have imposter syndrome, but they all seem to have a little bit of this stylistic confidence about them. Was that by design, or is that just kind of how the characters roll through the situations for you?
It's by design because everybody, well, like you said, everybody has that, moments of imposter syndrome. And okay, Heinlein is my all-time favorite author, so I go back to him all the time for quotes.
Mm-hmm.
The difference between courage and bravery is often a matter of timing.
Yeah.
So they may have all these doubts, and sometimes they express, and they'll express them.
Yeah.
But once they decide on a course of action, they're going to go through with it because this is the best. This is the best choice that they can make as far as they know. And they change course too. If they find out that there's something better, they'll change course. They're not, no, my way or the highway. That's a flaw. That's a flaw that actually is in some of the antagonists.
Mm-hmm.
The flexibility versus being inflexible.
Right.
So, both sides of that confidence coin.
Did you find that, like, I'm sure you had to do, because you do a really good job of describing the fight scenes and the movements and things like that, and I'm curious, with researching that, did you find that's where a lot of the confidence comes from? Because it's inherent in all of these characters. It's like it's almost like breathing to them. They just instinctively do it, right? They find that they know how to, throw a standing kick or jump over a back and he punch a guy in the face, kind of idea.
I don't know. I would disagree that they inherently know, because remember,
I mean, there was training, but
Kendra has gotten into a lot in her life between the books.
Uh-huh.
I mean, she was an assassin for some part of that, some undefined part of that, where she had, I think she had 18 kills.
A role, though, that they saw her being when she
but again, so they took, Outlook saw some physical gifts in her and trained them up.
Mm-hmm.
And she took to that. You look at Ayanna, she has some of those physical gifts, enough so that she can keep herself out of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
But her go-to is her mind, because she knows that that's her strength. So they all know where they are, they know where their base is. They know where they can start and go from there.
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, and knowing that that's a quiet confidence that always occurs with people naturally. When you figure out what you're good at, you want to ride that as long as you can. That's just human nature a little bit. I love that. Uh, I'm curious. Now that you've run into Ghost of Tandor and you're doing the Artemis War, you have naturally evolved as a writer just by writing words and continue to write more words. And I'm kind of curious, where does your universe benefit the most from that natural writing that you're creating and that you've grown into?
I think I think the biggest gain for the universe is that I'm able to add more layers of complexity to the story without making them clunky.
Hmm.
You know, if you read through the Artemis War series from Road to the Stars to Triumph's Ashes, by Triumph's Ashes, you've got things operating on a whole bunch of different levels, from personal conflicts and personal desires to, to talking about, the rights and responsibilities of citizens and, what and what people are willing to pay for their dreams to come true. What cost are they willing to pay? Along with questions about what makes a human. So all of that is operating in the story, which is on the very surface, on the very top, it's a climactic book in a space opera. It's the big battle.
Yeah.
It's the one of these two sides is going down for good.
That's awesome. I love that. I'm curious. When did the LGBTQ aspect of this come into play for you? Is that something you were longing to do and write about? Did it naturally occur throughout, learning about these characters and kind of giving them their backstory and kind of dictating who they are? Where did that all come into play for you?
So again, the Cassidy Chronicles starts at a wedding. The wedding is a triad wedding. It's Ayanna, Kendra, and Derek. So it's there from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
It is there from the very beginning. And, the various characters, that's just who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Double Dip, Daniela Garcia, she's straight. Mostly. At least, not to give any spoilers away.
Right.
But through the novels, she's hetero, and honestly, in the story that I'm thinking about, When Cats Fly, she's hetero as well.
Mm-hmm.
But she's also engaged in a plural marriage. At that point, she's married to her husband, and another woman is married to her husband. They're not married to each other necessarily. They don't have a romantic relationship, but they're friends. They kind of have to be. So it's who they are, and there are way too many bad stories out there where you have an LGBTQ character whose sole purpose is to die or have something horrible happen to them.
Right.
That's not how the world actually works. There are plenty of LGBTQ people who have fantastically successful lives.
Yeah.
And why not tell those stories too?
How much was it about getting it right for you? How important was that? Did you seek like sensitivity readers? Were there things you did, steps you did to ensure that you were getting it right?
Okay, so it's going to sound horrible. I have not used sensitivity readers.
That's not horrible. I mean,
But I've been making sure that I've been a good ally to the community for a long time. And I have a lot of friends who are in the community. And so, you know, if you get to know people as people, then you get a sense of how they're going to react. And honestly, all the people I've known over years and years and years, the only difference between LGBTQ and non-LGBTQ is who they're attracted to.
mm-hmm.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
They react the same way to, a hurricane as anybody else.
Sure.
So it's when it's the people who. So I just write them as people. That's who they are. I write them as people having human reactions to situations.
Mm-hmm.
I think the writers who run into trouble are the ones who exaggerate it,
Mm-hmm.
who make a point of saying things.
Mm-hmm.
It's just who they are. You don't need to make a big deal out of it. It's like the kiss at the end of the last Star Wars movie.
Yeah.
That happened in the background. It's who those two characters were. It had nothing to do with their ability to fight the remains of the Empire.
Right.
No impact whatsoever. It's just them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all of my characters. It's who they are.
Do you have the same philosophy writing from a woman's perspective, or do you think that's a little different?
If I was writing this anything set in current time,
mm-hmm.
then it would be hugely challenging, because I know that the way the world perceives a man is different from the way the world perceives a woman.
Yeah.
Since I'm writing science fiction, I can posit a world where those changes, where changes have happened so that those differences in perception have been ironed out. That's not to say you won't still have jackasses, but they're going to stand out more. They'll be the exception rather than the rule.
Mm-hmm.
So when you write people who are male or female or non-binary, who are equal to anybody else, they are treated as an equal by anybody else. And when somebody doesn't treat them as an equal, everybody's, the characters are all looking at that one going, excuse me?
Do you feel like in shining a light on some vulnerability and having the doubt aspect of it, even with your male and female characters equally, that helps to kind of bridge that gap a little bit too?
Well, if you show people what could be, then it gives them something to work for.
Yeah.
Terminator 2, the fate, the future is not set. The future is not set. Fate is what you make of it. So, if there's a future where the jackasses who are putting down somebody else because of who they are is the exception, then that's something we can work for. I mean, that's why I my books, I quantify them as hope punk. It's a more optimistic future.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. That makes a lot of sense.
And Kendra believes it too. I mean, she watched when she was growing up, she watched our pop culture. So she grew up on Star Wars and Star Trek and the Avengers and Buffy and Supernatural and all of that. She grew up on all of this, and she particularly liked Star Trek. She particularly liked the ethos of Star Trek, which is everybody working together and exploring the universe and trying to make the universe a better place. And so she's putting it into motion. She's like, okay, I'm in a position where I can do something about this, and that's the future that I choose. So I'm going to work to make things better so that future becomes a reality. Even though I know, Kendra's saying, I know that was fiction. I can make it reality because I believe in it.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like a Galaxy Quest kind of idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna get you in trouble here.
Okay.
And I'm sorry for that. I apologize ahead of time. But I'm curious to know from the arbiter of Kendra's stories, and you're the one who tells these stories. Ultimately, what do you feel like Kendra's hardest emotion is to express? Where does she have the most difficulty?
She really doesn't like self-examination.
Really? Interesting.
Which is why she puts everything out there.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't want to be seen as having not so much depth, but as concealing anything. So she puts everything out there.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely everything. So that when somebody says, well, that's not you, she can say, yes, it is. Look around.
Mm.
At the end of recruiting Kendra, you could see her struggling with the idea that did this disaster at the end of the book, at the end of the story, was that actually her fault for not thinking things through?
Mm-hmm.
For essentially going rogue. Did she do that? She's not comfortable with it.
Mm.
So the difference between that Kendra and the Kendra in the later books is, she's just, this is who I am. Take me as I am, or not. It's up to you.
It's a maturity thing where like you learn how to compartmentalize it, right? You realize it's a flaw, and maybe you want to work on it, but you have other things going on because you're busy being an adult at that point.
Kind of, yeah. And the other thing that Kendra is terrible at is she's terrible at waiting. She is not a patient woman.
She's not patient at all.
She's not patient at all.
I can relate to that for sure.
She wants it. She wants it now. She wants to do it now.
I'm curious what Kendra's given you that you didn't expect that she would. What do you get from Kendra that you didn't know you had?
I think I borrow a lot of confidence from her.
Nice.
If you had told me 2 years ago that I was going to be on podcasts and doing interviews and going to conventions as a guest and going up on panels and speaking in front of people, I've been like, okay. But there are stories that I can tell, and there are things that I know that I can share, and they're worthwhile, and so I share them.
Do you get a kick out of writing from the woman's perspective a little bit? Do you feel like you tap into emotions that you don't normally get to express in real life?
A little bit. That I would say that it works both ways.
Mm-hmm.
Because it helps me. It gives me a channel to express things, and it is a bit of a challenge. But again, it's who Kendra is,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a good channel to explore.
How at this point do you design what stories you're going to tell? I mean, you have an arc of an Artemis War, and now you're into the Ghost of Tandor. Uh, are you now able to kind of go and, okay, I'm going to write this part of the universe here and kind of work on that? Or are you working simultaneously on certain things and you just decide that this is the good time to attack this?
It's mostly a case of the latter.
Mm-hmm.
So Ghost of Tantor was a story that needed to be told, so I told it. I'm working on Tracking Tantor, which is a sequel, and there will be probably one other book after that, so a little 3-book series.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that there is another novella, which is going to take place after recruiting Kendra.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there is another. So Kendra wrote Memories of Ayana, which is her childhood, but it only went up to about age 7. So there's much more to be told. And that's fun because that's very light.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the story that's hinted at the end of Thrown for a Loop,
Mm-hmm.
which actually ties the story that's out for submission to an anthology, kind of ties back to that one. And there are going to be short stories out there which are going to pop up. What happens after all of that? Haven't the slightest idea. I'll find out.
So you're willing to take the ride then and just go with
absolutely.
it. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, at some point, I suppose they're going to encounter an intelligent alien race that has space flight. I mean, so far they haven't. But it's early days yet. At the end of the Artemis War series, they found one intelligent race, which was at about Stone Age technology. But they also haven't explored very much. I mean, they've only been looking for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
They hadn't gone very far. So,
given your influences and your love of science fiction, how careful are you about balancing like tropes and ideas that have existed before, or are you using that to your advantage a little bit because you do know those things pretty well?
oh, I'm using them and twist, and turning them on their heads a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
For example, artificial intelligence. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows Hal, right?
Yeah.
And thanks to Will Smith, people know iRobot.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at AIs and saying, all right, what if they can choose to be human, but it's a one-way trip? They can't go back to being an AI. It's one or the other. Are they going to choose that? Or are they going to choose to be a brain in a box?
Mm-hmm.
One of the panels that I do pretty frequently now is gender identity and artificial intelligences, because an AI has no gender.
Right.
It's electrons and mechanical parts. No gender there. And yet, they have gender. So who decided? The programmer? The people they interact with? The AI? Can they change their gender? So, I mean, it's an interesting thing to poke at and look at from different perspectives. And the beauty about tropes is that you can take them and tweak them to fit what you want to do. Because faster than light travel, okay, that's a trope in science fiction. But there are so many different ways that different people address it. Some have the whole, you're folding the universe so that you bring 2 points close together and you're not really traveling. You're just going from this point to this point, which have been brought together. So you've folded the universe. Others are, you're shifting out of the universe. Others, so many different ways you can do it. And yet they're all that trope.
Yeah.
So.
It's hard. It's hard to avoid with science fiction. I mean, even as much as you can make up, there's so many things that just work so well for an audience. That's so established that they almost expect it. If they don't get it, they get upset.
Yeah, you have to know your audience. You have to know what they expect and what they're going to accept. And once you have a base that, from which to build, then you can add in things that they don't expect.
Yeah.
Things that surprise them.
Yeah. That work.
Yeah. One of the things nobody's particularly come up with a good explanation for why in the Star Trek universe, most of the intelligent life have 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head. Now, we know that that's because of budget considerations and 1960s makeup abilities. Yeah. But so in Next Generation, they grabbed onto an idea which is called Panspermia, which is some alien race came through and seeded all these planets. And so given enough generations of development, this is where they all ended up because they all started at the same point. Mm-hmm. So I took that, I've taken that Panspermia idea and I said, well, what if it was actually Earth that did it, but dinosaurs were around for 130 million years. Okay. We've been around as human beings for 50,000.
Yeah.
And we have space flight now.
Yeah.
And really that's a very recent development, right?
Yeah.
It hasn't taken us long to go from, hey, let's make a wheel to let's fly to the moon.
Right.
Okay. 5,000 years. So what could dinosaurs have done in 130 million?
Yeah.
So I'm saying, okay, 65 million years ago, shortly before the asteroid slammed into the Earth and killed all of their relatives, there were some intelligent dinosaurs who had a civilization and got off the planet and went exploring. And there you go. So that's how I'm turning that trope on its head.
Right.
Of why the alien races out there, tend to, have DNA which is compatible with human life and happen to live on oxygen, nitrogen, atmosphere planets.
How much does it help having Kendra be be the guide for. I mean, she calls out some of these tropes sometimes too. She's very bold about, oh, really, this is happening to me right now, kind of idea. Is that helpful to kind of tongue in cheek these things a little bit too, and kind of move them along for you?
Oh, absolutely. The things that are, you know, that are verging on cliche. But remember, the truth about cliches, the reason they exist is because they tend to be true.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Yeah.
however much we might want to avoid thinking about it and avoid it being there, sooner or later you're going to stub your toe on one.
Yeah.
And so a little bit of the breaking of the fourth wall, and it's like, really?
Yeah, and she's really good at that too. She's kind of the perfect design for that idea. So I love that. Uh, reaching into like politics and things of that nature. Uh, are you? Is there a certain philosophy you have about including that, incorporating that? Because worlds have to have it. I mean, worlds function some way, somehow, and things move along and things can't get done because, you have the politics of outlook or you have this or that. So I'm kind of curious about your philosophy about how you handle the politics aspect and kind of mix that in.
So in the Cassidyverse, at least in early days, you have three main political forces. You have the Solarian Union, which is the colonies, the extraterrestrial colonies on Moon, Mars, asteroids, and Titan. And they've banded together because basically they didn't want to listen to what Earth was telling them to do anymore. And since they held the high ground, and could basically get away with dropping rocks on anybody who didn't agree with them, they got their way. You have the U.S., which is broken up into about a dozen different countries, who have all different sorts of governments. And so Kendra and Ayana use those governments and Outlook. They use those governments to their advantage. They know how to play the various systems, whether it's an imperial system or a democratic republic or an oligarchy or feudal. They know how to play them and play them off each other. And then most of the rest of the world is under a unified government, kind of on the style of the EU.
So there's little governments within the bigger government that kind of
right. I mean, it's kind of analogous to the United States as it stands now with the states and the federal government, except that the member states of the United Earth government have less power. It's more of a cultural designation rather than a political designation.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, politics definitely plays a part in it. And, Kendra's not afraid to steal from whatever she believes is going to work. She believes in the ideals of, like the preamble to the Constitution. And she also looks back and recognizes flaws. And so again, she's setting up a government and she's deciding, okay, these are the things I'm going to keep and these are the things I'm going to change. And if you don't like it, you don't have to join. These are, it's the Terran Federation is my project and therefore it's my rules. And she tries to recruit. She's recruiting members of the Solarian Union, and that's what she tells them. Look, either we're going to be a good fit because we are a good fit, or we're not. And that's fine.
Do you, along those lines, do you feel like that there has to be, along with tropes and politics and dealing with human emotion and everything like that, do you feel like there has to be a layer of hard science fiction that you attach to this because there are systems and things that go on? Or do you feel like you can circumnavigate around that and kind of work your way through whatever you need to explain?
So I try not to stray into space fantasy. Okay.
Yeah, I kind of got that with the idea of that. Yeah.
Everything that is in there either is based on something real. I mean, even the CC armor, which is on the starships, it's something we could do, and we have done. I'm just tweaking a little bit of the physics to make it more long-lived.
But you won't stray far from the reality of it, basically.
Right. I mean, the star systems that I name and the planets that are there, those are planets that we have detected. Now, the specifics of the planets, we don't know.
Yeah.
So that's fair game.
Yeah.
That's absolutely fair game. But they use lasers. They don't, they eventually create energy torpedoes, but it's not like a photon torpedo from Star Trek. It's something that's more plausible. It's high energy. It's high energy plasma contained in a magnetic bubble. We can do that. We do that now. And then shot into space. So again, I try to ground things as much as possible in what is possible.
Are you, as you go along in these series, and I don't want to spoil anything for anybody who hasn't read them or anything like that, but are you finding it harder and harder to find an end game for a lot of these characters? Do you just want to hold on to them and kind of keep them in your bubble a little bit, or do you feel like what the end game for a lot of them is going to be? Well, you know what I mean? Not like you killing them off, or retiring them, or pushing them into a different direction, kind of idea.
So some of them, I just heard this song tonight and it reminded me, Say Goodbye to Hollywood, the old Billy Joel song. So many people in and out of my life. People come and go.
Yeah.
So not everybody, in fact, very few of the characters are going to have a defined end game, just because they're going to move on. They might get mentioned in passing. In When Cats Fly, it mentions what happens to Daniela's original AI. But I'm not going to follow his story. He's walked away, and others are, they get old, they die, they retire, they go off and do something else. They may show up somewhere unexpectedly. The character of Lissa Liana, who shows up. First time she shows up is in Memories of Ayana, when Kendra stabs her with a wooden stake through the arm. The next time she shows up is in Magic for Skeptics. She's at the party. And the third time she shows up is in The Martian Gambit. And she actually turns into a fairly major character there.
Mm-hmm.
Am I going to do anything else with her? Not necessarily. She doesn't necessarily have a story arc. She crosses paths with people and stories here and there. So the major characters, they haven't finished telling me their stories yet.
Mm-hmm.
I think I think Daniela's story is pretty much complete with where she is in that last story and Into the Black.
Mm-hmm.
But there are many years between that story and when she was introduced. Mm-hmm. So there are lots more stories to tell.
So what does it mean to you to have had this era of Kendra's? I mean, what is it? What has it really given you that you really feel like it's like? Are you just grateful that you have had this opportunity? And I mean, when you finally have to say goodbye to her, is that going to be the hardest thing you're going to have to do?
Oh, absolutely. That said, she's a very busy woman. She is a very, very busy woman. And that first story in Into the Black, Thrown for the Loop, if you go and figure out what the star dates are, the end of that story is set a good 250 years after the Artemis War series.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of storytelling. And she's been busy. She has been busy during that time. She has not been just...
she doesn't have patience. She doesn't have patience not to be.
No. In the story, Cass says to her, Kendra's saying the only way I can kind of pretend to have patience is by doing things and keeping myself busy and not waiting. So I'm not thinking about waiting for it. And Cass is going, oh, so is that why we've been so busy for the past 2 centuries?
That's awesome.
So, I mean, there's 200 years worth of stuff there, and there's a lot more story out there. So even when Kendra's story ends and, and she finally dies, that I will not possibly, there's no way in hell I will have told all of her story. There's going to be so much to backfill.
Mm.
I mean, that's the next, that's part of the next thing after recruiting Kendra. Okay, at the end of that, she's moving in with Rose.
Yeah.
Who doesn't even get a mention in the original Cassidy Chronicles. So what happens between 2103 and 2112 or so, which is when she and Cass reconnect? That's 9 years.
Yeah. It's a great tease for what's to come. Well, I really enjoyed the opportunity to sit down and talk to you about all this. This is really great to kind of break it down and get some perspective on how you write and what you write about. So I really appreciate that opportunity, and tell everybody where they can check out these wonderful books and how they can get their hands on it, and in what formats do you have them available for everybody?
Sure. So I have a website, CassidyChronicles.com. You can buy the ebooks directly from me there. You can also read all of the blurbs and watch the trailer videos, and you'll really get a good feel for what's in the books. If you prefer, they're all available in paperback. They're all available in hardback, and all of the Cassidy Chronicles books are available as audiobooks. They have all made it to audiobook. And you can get that through Audible. I think they distribute to iTunes as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then, if you want to, if you want to actually, see me in meat space as opposed to cyberspace, I'm going to be at Multiverse in Atlanta next month, and you're going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's see. The week after that, I'm at Mile High Con back in Denver. Nice. And then I'm at Tucson in Phoenix. No, not Phoenix. Tucson in Tucson in November.
Nice.
So, yeah. So
that's a good time to go to Tucson. November.
Yep. It'll be a lot of fun. I look forward to meeting a whole bunch of people, and I keep showing up on the Go Indie Now network too.
Yeah, we love it.
This is a good place to find me as well. But start with the link tree right here, and you can find me on Kindle Vella as well. The serial platform that Amazon's doing.
Awesome. Yeah, the link tree and the website are both on the description for everybody. So go ahead and click that and get yourself some Cassidyverse stuff and learn more about it and get enthralled with it, because it's awesome. And this was awesome. So thank you, Adam, so much for the opportunity. And remember, that's always time to go indie now, everybody. We'll see you soon. Sunday, we've got This Week in Indies and a whole bunch of other stuff coming up. So check us out. All right. Bye, everybody.